done by ship. So ships are very important, even though there are only 50,000 of them out there, 50,000 big ships out there. And when you consider there are about 250,000 or maybe even 300,000 registered vehicles in Morris County alone, you appreciate how few there are out there, these bigger ships, big ships. Nonetheless, it is very important that we pay attention to the shipping industry. You may remember this slide here. This is the population density map of the United States of America. What does that tell you? Consumption takes place right there. That's why New York, New Jersey is important. That's why New York, New Jersey is important, because it's concentrated. We consume goods, apparel, furniture, electronic gadgets and whatnot. Consumption takes place right there. That's why it is important, New York, New Jersey. Just to illustrate how these container boxes are packed, they are professionally done. So they utilize a space all the way to the ceiling. And that's a nice picture. This is probably one of the assembly-like furniture stuff. This is another shot of that, and these probably are better consumer goods, more likely than not dry goods, consumable items. And some are done artistically. These are used tires. They really utilize a space if you appreciate that. But then there are others not so well. These are amateurly done. The point that I'm trying to make here is this though. My company is an ocean carrier, and we carry goods in boxes. That's what we do, but we don't necessarily stuff the goods into the boxes. Let's say Tom imports goods from China. It's the merchandising suppliers that will stuff the boxes for him, right? And we will carry the boxes. We don't necessarily look at the containers, the inside of the containers, but we carry them, we load them on the ships, and we carry them to the United States or elsewhere for that matter. Just to illustrate the numbers, and you might remember this, about 3.7 million containers throughput in the New York, New Jersey area alone. That's coming in and going out. Of those, about 1.9 million containers are imported. And that translates to more than 7,000 containers every working day. Every working day. And if you put that into perspective, if you were to lay out all of the contents of the 7,000 containers on flat ground, that will cover probably 400, maybe 500 acres. When you consider the collective acreage of the marine terminals in the New York, New Jersey area is only about 350 acres. And that's exceeding the capacity every single working day. So it is physically impossible to inspect, physically impossible to examine, open up a container and examine the contents of these 7,000 boxes every day. We just simply don't have the resources. Our government doesn't have the resources. And there's no physical assets to do that. So the reality, unfortunately, today is only 2% of the boxes that come into the United States are physically examined. In other words, open up that container door and the contents examined. And that's kind of scary, isn't it? And that's where supply chain security comes into play. It's not a glorified science. It is a pragmatic, systematic process that the government, the industry, my industry, and citizens like yourselves form a partnership to ensure that the goods still flow into the United States, which we consume, and yet security is maintained. We all want to live and work and play in an environment where we feel safe. So this is the concept that we try to promote from the industry in conjunction with the government, with the help of citizens like yourselves, to ensure that we can maintain what we have earned. And that is a safe environment to play, work, and live and do what we want to do. Unfortunately, security today after 9/11 is something that we have to, I don't want to say pay for it, but we have to maintain it. We have to earn it. We've earned it, and we need to continue to maintain that. And how we do that? Well, some of the things that we face with: terrorism, drugs, contraband, stowaways, and I'll show you some pictures to illustrate what that is. Let's see. Let's take terrorism as a number one. Does anybody know what that depicts by any chance? It's called RPM. It stands for Radiation Monitor, RPM, Radiation Portal Monitor. And it is a gadget that measures the muons. Muons are the particles in the air that is emitted from radioactive materials in the air. And then it's a passive system. In other words, you don't inject X-rays or gamma rays. And what we see is this kind of thing at Port Newark and all other major ports in the United States of America. Every single one of the containers that come into the United States will go through the RPM. So even though we don't physically examine the contents, at least they go through the RPM to ensure that there's no radioactive materials inside the contents. So that virtually eliminates dirty bombs. And that's really the scary thought, isn't it? It's the bombs and the dirty stuff and what is it called? Weapons of mass destruction, I guess. So those are the things that we try to prevent, and at least on the radioactive matters, we've successfully nicked that issue, we think. And again, as I said, it is a passive system. It just measures the muons in the air that's already in existence, emitted from radioactive materials. So the drivers stay inside the cab, and they go through at pretty much 10, 15 miles an hour. I guess that's the maximum speed. It's not so different from going through Easy Pass, really. And they go through, and if there is any radioactivity detected, then the truck is stopped. And there's another handheld device that will go along the container for better detection, because there are, I have to admit, a lot of false positives, because there are naturally radioactive materials like porcelain, granite, stoneware, and things like that. So there are a number of false positives in going through the RPM, but that's a lot better than false non-positives. Right?
So these are containers coming off ships or coming on ships?
These are all outgoing. That's correct. So every single one of the
coming out of the port.
Coming out of the port, yes. Yes. But when you think about it, if the radioactive materials, if a dirty bomb is already here, it's kind of too late, isn't it? It's already here on our land. So our thinking, Homeland Security's thinking is that they want to expand the defense line outward so that our shoreline is the last line of defense, not the first line of defense. And what they do is to enlist and position a more sophisticated equipment on other parts of the world, namely about 60 ports around the world that account for about 85 to 90% of the incoming loads into the United States. Now they're equipped with gamma ray and X-ray type of equipment, which will show this type of images. So they take two measures. They will vet the documentation of the cargo that's coming into the United States, and they will screen and the ones that arise or arouse suspicion to the customs agents stations overseas, and they will go ahead and go to the gamma ray or X-ray machine to take the image, and they will analyze what the contents are. This is a more colorful one. See, if you blow up that particular section, you see something like that. And they know there's something that's funny, that there's something that shouldn't be in there in a box. And of course, that really is most likely drugs. In the olden days, they used to come in duffel bags. They would, the crooks or the smugglers would just stuff a duffel bag or duffel bags with drugs, and they would just throw them in along with the other cargo, just like that. But now they've gotten a little bit more sophisticated. This is an ordinary container. When it's empty, it looks like this. But now, they'll build a second wall, a fourth wall, what we call cofferdam. And they will hide drugs behind the cofferdam so that it's not detected. Well, so as to try to avoid detection. Here's an ordinary shipment of plywood. But if you look at it closely, there are cocaine packets attached to, well, in between plywood sheets so that they can hide and transport these drugs into America. Here's a neat one, an ordinary looking load of pineapples, right? And if you peel one, you see a wax ball. What's inside? Drugs. And that's how they do it. So there's a more sophisticated detection methods that we employ. It's not necessarily my company. We always help the United States government, Homeland Security. But the crooks are also trying to stay one step ahead of us. So they started thinking outside of the box as well. And I mean that quite literally. And this picture requires a little bit of explanation. If you look at these chain things, these are the bumpers to protect the ship's hull from the pier. But if you look at this gadget right there, it's a trunk. It's a trunk attached to the ship's hull. So the crooks now don't use containers, but rather they dive into the water and attach these trunks to the hull of the ship so as to try to avoid detection. The contents? Cocaine. So there is a lot of contraband that also comes into the United States. Now, these are fairly ordinary looking cars, but we don't know that they are stolen. Now, one of the requirements for transporting vehicles, and this is probably universal, I'm sure it is, we have to identify the VIN number of each unit that we transport. And that's usually done by the intermediary. It's not necessarily the ocean carrier, but the intermediary, what we call forwarders. And they have their license at stake, so they have to be quite honest about it. It's like having a liquor license. So you want to, it is of value. So if you get caught with transporting stolen goods and whatnot, you risk your license. So their livelihood is at stake, and they have to do an honest job. So they will report the VIN numbers as it depicted, as it is with the vehicles. So when those VIN numbers, the information is submitted to the customs authorities, whether it's overseas or the United States or elsewhere, and these VIN numbers are usually vetted against stolen vehicles' VIN numbers, and that's how it's usually detected. We get weekly requests from customs authorities to hold certain shipments because they suspect that certain shipments are going outbound with stolen vehicles. So we usually withhold them, and without telling really the shippers who want to transport the goods overseas, and allow the customs authorities to complete their investigation. And when they say, all right, it's good to go, then we finally put them on the ship and off they go. So we certainly cooperate with the customs authorities in this regard. This is a picture of ivory goods, and these are already carved out and some are not. You may have noticed, perhaps not, just last week, China announced a ban of ivory trade, the ivory trade, at the end of 2017. So presumably, this kind of thing won't be happening very much involving China, but China has a heavy demand on ivory goods right now. So at least that part will be officially terminated. It doesn't mean that the black market won't continue to exist, unfortunately. But at least we shouldn't be seeing this type of goods being traded as much as we do today. Last but not least, stowaways. The United States of America is still a dreamland for many people in the third world countries or developing countries. So they take a risk and they station themselves in a container and they live a long, miserable 2-week journey into the United States, or for that matter, probably Northern Europe.
My stateroom.
They will fly. Yeah, I would hope Carnival Cruise Lines will get you a little better cabin than that. But when I talk about stowaways, it's not just human beings. It's that as well. Insects. Do you know what that is? It's the medfly. And they can literally obliterate the citrus industry in a very short span of time. So we in the United States jealously guard, United States Department of Agriculture in particular, they jealously guard the citrus industry, which is, I'm told, it's $3.5 billion industry. And how we do that? We're required to maintain the citrus products, which typically come in from Spain, Morocco, and those Iberia countries, for a period of time at a certain temperature. In this particular instance, I'm not sure what it is, but let's suppose they're clementines. And they would be kept in a cold temperature, about 34, 35 degrees for a period of 21 to 22 days. And that will ensure that the larva of the medfly is killed during that period of time. So cold treatment, as the name suggests, it's just an unsophisticated cold temperature treatment of the larva to ensure that they're killed. So we undergo that process. And when we fail, sometimes the probes fail and it doesn't register the right temperature and whatnot, but the USDA guidelines are very strict. So on those, in those instances, we either restart the cold treatment from day one, which would mean the product's shelf life will be compromised, or sometimes we just ship them up to Canada. The Canadians accept them because they have no citrus industries to protect. Right? So it's not that Canadians, sorry Nick, it's not that they accept poor products, it's just that they don't have an industry to protect. So they will welcome the products that are rejected from the United States. So, that's really the end of my presentation, but let me get back to the terrorism and the drugs part, and that's really the takeaway, I hope, that you will go home with. Homeland Security has a mantra, and you've heard this many times. If you see something, say something. Security is a partnership of the government, the industry, and citizens like yourselves. So if you do see something, say something. And I think we ought to take that to our heart to ensure that we can continue to live, work, and play in an environment where we feel safe. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.